Our top stories for tonight. The Prime Minister meets with an Iraqi economic delegation on a visit to discuss promoting economic ties and increasing trade exchange between the two countries. The Russian Defense Ministry releases footage of long-range bombers firing a series of cruise missiles at Daesh targets around the Syrian city of Raqqa. And U.S. Vice President Mike Pence assures a security meeting in Munich of the United States' support to NATO and its unwavering commitment to the alliance. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Prime Minister Hani al-Mulki met with an Iraqi economic delegation led by Chairman of Iraq's National Investment Commission, Sami al-A'raji. Mulki said Iraq is one of Jordan's key partners in trade, voicing hope that trade exchange between the two countries would resume its momentum in the near future, having been affected by security setbacks and land border closures. The delegation is in Amman to follow up on a recent visit to Baghdad by the Prime Minister, during which it was agreed to increase economic cooperation between the two sides. Mulki highlighted the importance of reopening the Tribil border crossing to facilitate Jordanian-Iraqi trade exchange, as well as the commencement of work on an oil pipeline between Basra and Aqaba. The meeting also discussed tax exemptions for Jordanian exports to Iraq, as well as ways to enhance the kingdom's energy security through the provision of Iraqi oil and gas. Also in Amman, Al-A'raji co-chaired a meeting of the Jordanian-Iraqi Businessmen Forum with President of the Jordan Investment Commission, Thabit al-Wir, in the presence of Iraq's ambassador to Jordan, Safiya Sahel. Al-Wir told the meeting that Jordan views Iraqi businessmen as strategic partners and noted that Jordan has finalized constitutional measures for the ratification of an investment promotion agreement with Iraq that will usher in a new era of economic cooperation between the two countries. The two sides were in agreement on the need to work together to remove obstacles hindering the flow of investments between the two sides. Prime Minister Mulki chaired a meeting of the government economic team and instructed them to propose a detailed plan aimed at promoting economic growth. He said the plan should be ready for a review and endorsement by the end of this month. Mulki said the government is committed to His Majesty's directives that citizens should not be overburdened financially to solve the economic downfall. He urged solutions that create jobs and, in parallel, achieve administrative reforms. Again, Mulki reiterated his intent to fight all forms of corruption and scale down on red tape, noting that corrupt civil servants are detrimental to investment and to citizens' interests. The Russian Defense Ministry published a short video of long-range bombers firing a series of cruise missiles at Daesh targets around the Syrian city of Raqqa. The Tupolev 95 bombers had taken off from Russia and flown over Iran and Iraq to get to Syria, where they successfully targeted terrorist training camps and a command point. Elsewhere, Syrian and Russian warplanes continued to conduct airstrikes on a number of cities. This report has the details.
Clouds of dark smoke could be seen over the Syrian city of Dir'a as buildings caught on fire after Russian jet planes bombarded it in an effort to help government forces drive rebels out of the city. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that the Russian planes targeted the city with 6 strikes today, at the heel of dozens of airstrikes conducted yesterday. On the ground, fierce clashes resumed between the Syrian army and the rebels, as the army attempted to take control of the rebel-held crossing and swathes of territory in the southern strip of the city in order to sever the rebel links between the eastern and western parts of the city. The city of Hims was not spared from raids as well. The Syrian warplanes carried out airstrikes in the besieged rebel-held district of the city. Al-Wa'ir, the last rebel-held neighborhood in the western city, had not been a target for months despite intense violence raging elsewhere in the country. The government had tried to reach an agreement with the rebels in Al-Wa'ir that would see rebel fighters and their families leave safely and the government take over. However, early this month, after failed negotiations, bombardment of the district resumed and violence escalated between the Syrian army and rebels. The opposition said such agreements are part of a government strategy to forcibly displace populations from opposition-held areas after years of besiege and bombardment. However, Syrian government media outlets reported that strikes were in response to rebels firing at residential areas of government-held Hims neighborhoods. Nancy Khair for the news at 10.
Over to Iraq, the U.S.-led military coalition said its forces have destroyed a building in the main medical complex of western Mosul. They said the building was suspected of housing a command and control center for Daesh terrorists. The strike followed reports that Daesh terrorists are dug in among civilians on the western side of Mosul and storing weapons in hospitals, schools, mosques and churches as a tactic to avoid targeting. The offensive to dislodge Daesh from western Mosul could displace up to 400,000 civilians and involve a siege in the densely populated old city. United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for Iraq, Lise Grandi, says this battle will be a different battle than in the east, with enormous implications for civilians. Among other difficulties, tanks and armored vehicles cannot pass through the city's narrow streets. Western Mosul contains the old city center with its ancient souks, Grand Mosque, and most government administrative buildings. Up to 800,000 civilians are estimated to be living in the western part. Half of them could flee their homes. The UN is considering several options for ensuring civilians access to food, medicine, and water. At the annual Munich Security Conference, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg welcomed Germany's pledges to spend more on defense. His comments followed German Chancellor Angela Merkel's announcement that her government would do everything possible to meet a NATO target for spending 2% of economic output on defense by 2024.
Increased defense spending and fairer burden sharing. This is good for Europe and it's good for NATO. I applaud Chancellor Merkel's commitment to increased German defense spending. It is a vital contribution to European freedom, peace and security.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, meanwhile, sought to assure Europe that the United States will back NATO even as it looks for new ways to cooperate with Russia.
Now, the President asked me to be here today to bring his greetings and a message. But today, on behalf of President Trump, I bring you this assurance. The United States of America strongly supports NATO and will be unwavering in our commitment to this transatlantic alliance.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, also addressing the Munich Security Conference, said Moscow wants pragmatic relations with the United States based on mutual respect and understanding of the increased responsibility for global stability.
The constructive progress of Russia-US relations lies within our mutual interest. Moreover, since America is as close of a neighbor for us as the European Union, we are separated by only 4 kilometers on the Bering Strait.
On the sidelines of the security conference in Munich, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi held talks with the U.S. Vice President. According to media reports, the talks dealt with joint efforts to counter terrorism, as well as the battle to end the threat of Daesh on world security. And while leaders met, anti-NATO demonstrators took peacefully to the streets, demanding the world disarm and accusing the meeting of contributing to the destruction of the planet. Also on the sidelines of the Munich security meeting, Foreign Minister Ayman al-Safadi held meetings with his French and Italian counterparts that dealt with bilateral ties as well as the Syria crisis and its repercussions on the kingdom. The discussions also tackled the stalemate in the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations and the need to relaunch the peace process to resolve the conflict. Safadi also held separate meetings with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the Arab League Chief Ahmed Abdel Ghait, and with the UN Special Syria Envoy Staffan de Mistura. Retired U.S. General and former CIA Chief David Petraeus is no longer a candidate to be President Donald Trump's national security advisor. Sources close to the matter said Petraeus wanted control over staffing and decisions within the National Security Council, but Trump was reluctant to grant that authority. The retired four-star general, who resigned as head of the CIA in 2012, was on a short list for the job after Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, got fired. Finding a replacement has been a challenge for Trump. Retired Vice Admiral Robert Harward, the president's first choice to take over from Flynn, turned down the offer, citing family and financial reasons. And it doesn't take a big snowstorm for people to get creative and having fun. A group of teenagers braved the cold weather in the southern city of Karak to welcome the recent snowfall their own way. This video taken of the young ones went viral on social media and shows them sliding on a snow-laden road using a canoe-shaped metal sheet towed by a pickup. The teenagers can be seen roaring with laughter and screaming with excitement. A new sweets shop in New York has touched a raw nerve. New Yorkers are lining up for hours at Cookie Dough Bakery that opened less than a month ago. The shop offers scoops of cookie dough in more than a dozen flavors, including sugar cookie, brownie batter, and salty and sweet, as well as seasonal confections such as gluten-free and vegan options. For years, people have been warned not to eat cookie dough because of the raw eggs. But the dough is made with pasteurized eggs and heat-treated flour, making it safe to eat raw, but also engineered for baking.
Everybody loves cookie dough. There's something nostalgic about it. It reminds people of their childhood. It brings them back to the kitchen and with their mother or their grandmother, just kind of baking and licking the spoon, or, you know, having a few bites of what they were doing. It took a lot of testing and trying to figure out which ingredients to substitute for the potentially harmful ingredients that could be found in regular cookie dough. So we do two things. We change the egg. The egg that we use is a pasteurized egg, so it is completely safe to eat.
After New York, fashionistas are gathering for London Fashion Week, where a mix of established names, high street labels, and emerging designers will present their latest creations. More than 50 catwalk shows and 30 presentations will be held during the Fashion Week, which kicked off yesterday, including labels like Burberry, Mulberry, Versace's Versus line, and Temperley London. While smaller than fellow fashion capitals New York, Milan, and Paris, London Fashion Week will draw fashionistas from around the world. London Fashion Week runs until the 21st. In cycling, Norwegian Alexander Kristoff won the fourth stage of the Tour of Oman in a tight photo finish that saw him edge across the line ahead of Italian Sonny Colbrelli and Belgian Greg Van Avermaet after nearly 3 hours of racing. Belgian Ben Hermans of BMC Racing still leads the overall standings after the fourth round with a 5-second lead over Portugal's Rui Faria de Costa of the Abu Dhabi UAE team. With 4 stages raced, the Tour of Oman will have another 2 stages to decide the winner. Torren Yater-Wallace and Marie Martineau won the International Ski Federation FIS Freestyle Skiing World Cup half-pipe Olympic test event in Pyeongchang. The men's competition was won by Yater-Wallace of the US, who scored 95.60 to finish ahead of his compatriot Aaron Blanc, who scored 94.40, and Frenchman Benoit Valentin on 92.60. Yater-Wallace now leads the World Cup standings ahead of Blanc. The women's title went to Martineau of France, whose best run of 91.60 was enough to beat Devine Logan of the US 86.80 and Japan's Ayana Onozuka 84. Martineau tops the overall women's standings ahead of Annalisa Drew of the U.S.
The 2x40, two players down below. She's been known to wind up pretty spectacularly. There's a big 900. Claiming it right there. The French mother of one 7-year-old.
And finally, the weather forecast. Very cold conditions continue in most regions for the rest of tonight, with a low of 1 degree Celsius in Amman. Frosty conditions also affect the hilly areas, Badia, Eastern Plains and the northern Jordan Valley in the late hours. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures is expected, but it remains cold in most regions with easterly to southeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively warm weather tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and slightly high seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Before we end the news, here's a quick recap of our top stories. The Prime Minister meets with an Iraqi economic delegation on a visit to discuss promoting economic ties and increasing trade exchange between the two countries. The Russian Defense Ministry releases footage of long-range bombers firing a series of cruise missiles at Daesh targets around the Syrian city of Raqqa. And U.S. Vice President Mike Pence assures a security meeting in Munich of the United States' support to NATO and its unwavering commitment to the alliance. With this, we conclude tonight's news. I'm Dana Abu Sham. Thanks for watching and have a good night.